Whispers turned into roars behind closed palace walls as Prince William, in a stunning midnight directive, froze all funding allocated to Queen Camilla's private office. No prior warnings, no ceremonial explanations. The once steady stream of resources, influence and power supporting Camilla's operations, frozen, suspended, reassigned straight into the heart of the Wales household. But what triggered this unprecedented blow? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The message didn't arrive with theatrics. No trumpets, no public announcement. Just a tightly sealed internal notice that moved like wildfire through palace corridors, jumping offices, igniting whispers, panic and disbelief in its wake. By dawn, the doors of Camilla's private office felt heavier, quieter, as if the very walls had absorbed the shock. Phones rang without answers. Schedules collapsed without explanation. Staffers who had operated for years with confident authority suddenly found themselves staring into uncertainty. The funding that once powered their entire operation strategy teams, correspondence units, ceremonial logistics, outreach projects had vanished overnight, leaving behind questions no one dared ask too loudly. What shook the palace even more was not just the freeze itself, but the signature beneath it. Not the king, not a joint royal council, but William, alone, clean, decisive. A move that sent constitutional murmurs racing through royal legal circles and ignited private alarm within Clarence House. Treasury advisors who prided themselves on being several steps ahead were caught entirely off guard, blindsided by a decision already executed before debate could even begin. There had been no warning briefings, no preliminary discussions, no ceremonial buffer to soften the blow. It was delivered like a verdict. Inside Camilla's camp, aides later described the moment as an ambush of silence. No explanations arrived with the notice, no guidance followed, just the cold finality of halted transfers, suspended authorizations, and immediate reallocation orders. Some stood frozen at their desks, not knowing whether to pack up files or sit tight. Others quietly began moving personal items, sensing the gravity of the shift before it was officially spoken. The Queen Consort's operation, once a secure pillar inside the royal structure, had been reduced to an institution holding its breath. Meanwhile, across another wing of the royal machine, movement surged in the opposite direction. Funds that had vanished from Camilla's domain reappeared with remarkable speed inside newly expanded Wales administrative divisions. New hires were approved, project streams were accelerated, strategic teams multiplied. It was not subtle, it was not accidental, it felt surgical, as if a single central artery of power had been deliberately rerouted, pulse and all. And within palace whisper networks, one phrase began to echo with growing certainty: this is not just budget, it is war. And as the ink dried on William's signature, another question emerged from within palace walls: what exactly pushed the heir to execute such a bold move against the Queen Consort? Beneath the surface of pageantry lies a quiet, relentless battle, competing offices, duplicate expenditures, and the shadow war for influence. William's decision wasn't just about numbers. It was a strike against redundancy, control, and Camilla's growing grip on internal royal operations. And for the first time, the Wales household stepped forward to claim what they believed was always theirs. Camilla's private office, once seen as an anchor of dignity and tradition, had evolved into a sprawling engine of influence coordinating correspondence, ceremonial agendas, patronage scheduling, and public relations. Yet as her office grew in prominence, so too did the friction it created. William had long harbored quiet frustration over the duplicative machinery operating alongside his own household. Two teams handling the same duties, two budgets competing for resources, two offices issuing overlapping statements, and behind it all, a quiet suspicion: was Camilla building her own monarchy, one protocol at a time? Pressure had been mounting. Catherine's own internal team, a rising force shaped by modern strategy and subtle diplomacy, had begun pushing for streamlined operations. Their case was clear: the monarchy of tomorrow could not be built on outdated relics and ceremonial bloat. They didn't just question the need for Camilla's office, they challenged its effectiveness. Wales insiders reportedly used blunt terms behind closed doors, calling Camilla's structure outdated, ceremonial, ineffective. While publicly respectful, the private discussions were anything but polite. Catherine's closest aides believed in efficiency, impact, and consolidation. To them, Camilla's office symbolized a version of the monarchy that needed to be left behind. One of the most contentious fault lines? Media strategy. The digital and press teams from both camps had begun stepping over each other, conflicting press releases, competing coverage angles, and rival narratives emerging from the same institution. It wasn't merely inconvenient, it was damaging. The public was confused, the staff demoralized, and the image of unity fractured. Behind the smiles and photo ops, a Cold War was brewing, and its battleground was access, control, and public voice. But perhaps the most revealing clue of all had been buried in data. Months earlier, an internal audit had been quietly commissioned. The results, quietly circulated among select senior royals, were damning. Efficiency gaps, budget redundancies, a loss of clarity in internal hierarchies. William didn't need ammunition, but now he had it. And with that report in hand, his moment arrived. The suspension of Camilla's budget wasn't a standalone action. It was the end of a long game, the final move in a strategy built over time, waiting for the right fracture to strike. But even if this had been brewing for months, why now? What unseen spark ignited this at this precise moment, and who was behind it? While public eyes followed fashion and formalities, something monumental unfolded behind palace walls. Catherine's household was expanding, not just in staff or duties, but in structure, command, and quiet influence. William's budgetary redirect wasn't just punishment, it was empowerment. And at its center stood Catherine, poised not as Princess of Wales, but as the royal house's rising nucleus. In the shadow of Camilla's financial freeze, the Wales household surged into strategic overdrive. Within a matter of weeks, Catherine's private staff had grown by a staggering 40%, an expansion not driven by ceremony, but by preparation. The message was subtle but clear. The future wasn't waiting. From newly appointed directors of digital strategy to behind-the-scenes experts in Commonwealth diplomacy and youth leadership, Catherine was building something far more enduring than public affection. She was assembling the architecture of a parallel monarchy, one that didn't need crowns or thrones to prove its power. This wasn't pageantry. This was succession by strategy. The redirected funds once fueling Camilla's long-standing traditionalist efforts now flowed directly into the veins of a modernized operation spearheaded by Catherine herself. Outreach initiatives were suddenly revitalized across Commonwealth nations. Youth programs that had stalled due to lack of support found themselves fast-tracked and fully funded. Private meetings were held not in public spectacle but in quiet treasury chambers where Catherine, often flanked by top advisors, outlined a vision that extended far beyond seasonal engagements. Those who sat across from her described a poised, unwavering figure, clear in her expectations, precise in her plans. It wasn't just funding she had gained, it was legitimacy. Yet through it all, William remained the face of the decision. Publicly, he framed the reshuffle as a necessary reorganization, a long overdue modernization of royal operational structures. But privately, his role was as guardian not just of the throne, but of Catherine's ascent. Every move he made deflected scrutiny from her and absorbed the criticism himself. He understood what was at stake. Shielding Catherine wasn't merely about love or loyalty, it was a calculated tactic. Let the headlines debate his aggression. Let the court whisper about power plays. Behind those distractions, Catherine was becoming the monarch in waiting, not by title but by infrastructure. There were no declarations, no ceremonies, no ornate transitions, only the quiet rhythm of power shifting beneath the surface. Each new hire, each restructured portfolio, each sealed treasury directive marked a step in the careful elevation of the Wales household. And those closest to the inner sanctum began to understand the deeper implication. This wasn't about preparing Catherine for the future. It was about anchoring her into the present. The Wales era wasn't approaching, it had already begun. And as Catherine's influence quietly bloomed, Camilla's silence was deafening until that silence shattered behind tightly locked palace doors. Sources confirm it was not King Charles, but Camilla herself who stormed into the Buckingham corridor demanding answers. She wasn't merely stunned, she was furious. And those inside the room describe a queen who felt betrayed, not just by William, but by a system she thought she had conquered. The silence that had followed the budget freeze was not accidental, it was strategic. But Camilla refused to be reduced to a footnote in a transformation. She had no part in authoring. Insiders say she bypassed protocol entirely, confronting Charles behind closed doors with an emotional intensity that shook the king's closest aides. She hadn't been warned. She hadn't even been consulted. And in that moment, it wasn't her royal title she invoked. It was her role as the woman who had, in her eyes, rebuilt a monarchy from ashes. Charles, already weary from months of internal fracturing, reportedly remained composed, but distant, offering vague responses and procedural excuses that only fueled Camilla's fury. The confrontation did not stop there. When William's senior advisor entered the corridor just moments later, Camilla pivoted her anger with precision. Voices reportedly rose. Doors closed abruptly. And within those walls, a singular sentence was said to pierce the heart of the entire exchange. "I built this court from ruins, and now you hollow it out." That line, later repeated in hushed tones by shaken aides, would define the emotional rupture now unfolding at the highest levels of the royal household. Camilla's belief wasn't just that she had been wronged but erased. For palace aides, the confrontation sent shockwaves through the hierarchy. Staff who had once moved seamlessly between Camilla's and William's operations were now caught in a no-man's land of clashing allegiances. Every step, every email, every nod of approval became a potential act of betrayal. The old system of mutual respect was no longer holding. In its place, confusion reigned, and above it all, Camilla stood defiant, isolated, but unyielding. Her attempts to secure a private meeting with William were quietly refused. Sources suggest he declined, not from disrespect, but strategy advisors warned such a conversation would only escalate matters and further destabilize public unity. William, ever the tactician, chose distance over confrontation, silence over spectacle. Yet even that strategy couldn't stop what was already unfolding behind the scenes. Rumors began to swirl that palace security footage had captured parts of the confrontation. Some insiders whispered that a portion had even been archived for legal review. But the footage, if it exists, has never surfaced. The palace, aware of the explosive nature of the encounter, has refused all comment. What remains are only the echoes, shouted words, slammed doors, and the unmistakable crack in Camilla's standing. But what Camilla didn't realize was that this wasn't just about money or office space, this was about rewriting her role in the next monarchy era. Charles once envisioned a balanced monarchy, Camilla as the soft power beside the crown, William as the structural steward. But now, with William suspending Camilla's budget without his consultation, whispers began to swirl. Is the king losing control of his own court? And has his legacy already begun to crumble? The first shock wasn't Camilla's fury, it was Charles's silence. According to multiple palace sources, the king was not informed in advance of the exact timing of William's directive. When the freeze was enacted, Charles reportedly learned of it the same way many within the royal machinery did, through a discreet internal circular. There was no private warning, no briefing over tea, no familial prelude to soften the blow. And in that omission, a line was crossed not of money, but of monarchy. Those closest to the king recall a stunned stillness, not anger. A silence born not of strategy, but disbelief. For a sovereign who once prided himself on orchestration, this moment marked a brutal reminder. Orchestration without control is merely illusion. What followed was not confrontation, but quiet disintegration. The rift between father and son, long speculated, now had its evidence, not through words exchanged, but through actions withheld. William had moved decisively, without deferring to the man whose crown still sat heavy on the throne, and Camilla, already reeling, found no ally in her husband. Her allies within the palace, some of them fixtures of her reign for over a decade, were shaken. They had expected the king to step in, to speak, to reverse, to command. But no such command came. Instead, they watched as the monarch chose stillness. And in that choice, they saw not calm, but collapse. Within the quiet corners of the palace, the murmurs turned darker. One anonymous senior aide offered a phrase that would soon become a whispered refrain. The king is now a figurehead in internal affairs. Not a leader, but a symbol. A shadow presiding over a structure now clearly shaped by others. And as departments realigned and loyalties shifted, an uncomfortable reality began to take hold. There were now two power centers within the monarchy, two royal orbits. The House of Windsor, rooted in tradition, and the Wales household, charging forward with strategy, ambition, and control. A dual court system in everything but name, one bound by ceremonial precedent, the other liberated by forward vision. Publicly, the palace maintained composure. But inside, senior advisors faced a chilling question. Had the king already abdicated not in title but in influence? His retreat from day-to-day control, once seen as a dignified step back in favor of his heir's preparation, now looked more like a vanishing act. Meetings once led by Charles were now chaired by William. Initiatives formerly blessed by the king were now originated by the prince. It wasn't an emergency, but it was unmistakable. The balance had shifted, and while Charles retreated into reflection, William doubled down, calling a secret summit that would reshape royal allocations for the next decade. No cameras, no announcements, only whispers of vehicles arriving at Windsor under the cover of dusk. Inside, William, Catherine, Anne, Edward, and a select group of advisors. Missing? Camilla. At this covert summit, royal household lines were redrawn, and a future was forged without her name on it. The gathering was not ceremonial, it was strategic. Quietly orchestrated, it brought together the figures who now represented the pulse of the monarchy's next chapter. This was not a moment for formality, it was an operation. At its core lay a singular agenda, to reallocate not just finances, but power. The king's absence was noted. Camilla's was deliberate. Every chair occupied inside the stone walls of Windsor that evening belonged to someone ready to reshape the royal future from within. And with William at the helm, the summit unfolded with urgency, determination, and ruthless clarity. The focus was uncompromising, realigning royal funds to support the rising Wales household. Resources were no longer to be fragmented. The duplications, the ceremonial redundancies, the outdated patronage layers, those were identified, evaluated, and stripped down. The new order would emphasize efficiency, youth engagement, international relevance, and future-facing legacy. And it wasn't just William who made that case. Princess Anne, sharp and unyielding, reportedly made a forceful argument in support of transferring institutional weight toward the Wales camp. She described it, according to sources, not as a betrayal of tradition but a survival tactic. Prince Edward, often the quietest of the senior royals, was handed a key responsibility: oversight. He would manage the audit trails of all newly redirected funds, ensuring accountability not just in numbers but in allegiance. His appointment signaled a deeper message. This reorganization was not symbolic. It would be tracked, measured, and enforced. Budgets that once protected ceremonial grandeur now shifted toward strategic operations, media modernization, and outreach capability. And most revealing of all, security and protocol budgets, long safeguarded for Camilla's events, were now to be absorbed into the core activities of the Wales household, silent, final, and absolute. What made this summit explosive wasn't just what was decided, but who was excluded. Camilla, not notified, not briefed, not even informed. She learned of the summit after the fact from a sympathetic aide who received word from inside Windsor. The emotional fallout, though never formally documented, was immediate. Reports suggest that Camilla viewed this as her ultimate dismissal, not in public, not in scandal, but through quiet erasure. A summit where future lines of the monarchy were drawn, where her legacy was not only left out, but no longer required. That night, for those within the inner circle, the balance of power shifted definitively. What had begun as a financial freeze had transformed into a structural coup. And while the ink dried on new allocations, a darker question began to rise. Was this merely administrative or a prelude to full erasure? Symbols matter, ceremonies, offices, budgets. They're more than logistics, they're presence. And one by one, Camilla's royal footprints began vanishing, funding revoked, appearances cancelled, correspondence redirected. Was this merely evolution, or was Queen Camilla being strategically written out? The quiet dismantling didn't arrive in one sweeping order. It unfolded like a slow eclipse. The first signs were subtle. Ceremonial duties once assumed to be Camilla's by default were quietly reassigned first to Catherine, then to Wales-appointed coordinators. Internal schedules showed shifts, with Camilla's appearances thinned out and redistributed. She was not removed, but diluted. And to those who understood the language of royal power, that subtlety was far more chilling. Because erasure, when done effectively, never announces itself, it leaves silence where presence once stood. Then came the operational pivot. The media coordination once handled by Camilla's team. Her messaging, her engagements, her public visibility was absorbed into the Wales digital arm without formal declaration. The transition was seamless, professional, and complete. Overnight, her narratives became theirs. Camilla's voice, once carefully curated by trusted aides, was now shaped, filtered, and sometimes omitted entirely by teams loyal to a different household. And when palace briefings for upcoming royal events circulated internally, the blow became undeniable. Camilla's name had vanished from 3 of them. There was no public fallout, no statement, just a growing absence where certainty used to live. The effect on her office was equally swift. Senior staff members who had once operated with unshakable loyalty were reassigned or released. Roles were not replaced. Budgets were not restored. Camilla's once fortified unit was now described in internal whispers as ghosted from within. No grand dismantling, just slow, methodical vacancy, empty desks, closed doors, an office reduced to remnants. The statement from one anonymous source inside the palace summed it up in chilling brevity: Camilla's reign is now only symbolic. For her allies, the message was unmistakable. This was not coincidence, this was not benign modernization. This was a deliberate unthreading. Some framed it as the necessary next step in royal evolution, an end to outdated duplications and the rise of a streamlined future. But others called it what they believed it truly was: a calculated sidelining. Not of a figurehead, but of a queen. The weight of it wasn't in a single moment, but in the accumulation of absences. The traditions Camilla once embodied were no longer hers to perform. They had been reassigned, rewritten, or erased. Yet while the machinery of influence moved without her, Camilla watched and waited. She was not naive. She understood what was being done and, perhaps more importantly, who was behind it. But even amid erasure, Camilla had one card left to play, and she played it with devastating intent. Just when the palace believed she'd accept her fate, Camilla executed a maneuver no one saw coming. A fiery public appearance, a speech laced with veiled defiance, and behind it unreleased letters, confidential patronage notes, and decades-old agreements that could change everything. The Royal Foundation Gala was not meant to be her moment. In fact, she wasn't even listed to speak. But as the room filled with donors, dignitaries, and a press corps starved for substance, Camilla took the stage with a calculated grace. And then, without warning, she went off script. What began as a standard thank you quickly morphed into something else. Something sharp. Eyes widened, spines straightened, as she delivered a chilling line that now echoes across every corner of the monarchy. Power may change rooms, but legacy haunts hallways. The message was unmistakable. Camilla was not gone. She had simply gone quiet. And now she had found her voice again. The impact was immediate. Royal correspondents who had kept a polite distance from the power struggle now leapt forward, publishing bold analysis that questioned William's overreach and hinted at internal cracks widening behind closed doors. Pro-Camilla voices in the media painted the entire reorganization not as modernization, but as political vengeance. For the first time since the budget freeze, William found himself on the defensive not from within the palace, but from headlines that challenged his narrative. Even senior staff began whispering concerns about optics, the timing, the boldness, the symbolism. Camilla hadn't just made a statement, she had set a trap. And what few expected was the arsenal she had quietly preserved. Rumors swirled of meticulously kept correspondence logs, letters, memos, meeting notes documenting years of exchanges between Camilla and King Charles. Notes that allegedly outlined her role, her commitments, and most crucially, the promises made to her behind palace doors. These weren't sentimental keepsakes, they were leverage. Palace aides scrambled to confirm whether any such records had legal consequence, and when King Charles was seen entering private consultations with his legal counsel just days later, the whispers became certainties. Camilla had drawn a line and crossed it. Internally, tension soared. Advisors were split. Some argued for full containment, for silence, for retreat. Others demanded intervention, fearing that public perception would spiral into chaos if Camilla was allowed to control the narrative. But the damage had already been done. Her appearance had shifted the energy. She wasn't begging for inclusion, she was declaring she'd never been removed. What made the move explosive wasn't the content of the speech, but the force behind it. The confidence, the defiance, the threat buried just beneath the surface. Camilla had stopped reacting. She had begun retaliating. But even Camilla's counterstrike couldn't stop what was already in motion. The Wales transformation was nearly complete. With Camilla's office stripped and the monarchy's internal engine redirected, the Wales household stepped into the light not as supporters, but as the new centre of gravity. Catherine's voice grew louder. William's control sharpened. And the royal family? Forever changed. But what has been set in motion, can it ever be undone? The final shift came not in whispers, but with a formal declaration. A public statement, brief but seismic, confirmed what insiders already knew. The royal household would now operate under a newly consolidated protocol, one led entirely by the Wales unit. Gone were the fragmented structures of overlapping duties, redundant channels, and competing offices. In their place stood a single streamlined force, rooted in William's command and forged in Catherine's vision. The announcement sent shockwaves through the establishment, not because it was unexpected, but because it was undeniable. The transition that had begun in silence now stood tall in the light. As the dust settled, Catherine's role became unmistakably central. A newly created position overseeing international relations for the crown was quietly bestowed upon her, effectively placing her at the forefront of Britain's global soft power. Diplomats, Commonwealth envoys, and senior staff were briefed. Catherine's influence would now extend far beyond the ceremonial. She would speak for the crown abroad, shape strategic engagements, and carry the legacy of monarchy into places it had not been before. It was a role once considered unimaginable for a consort in waiting. Now it was hers alone. Behind the scenes, William finalized his consolidation. Communications, financial operations, and ceremonial planning, formally fragmented across multiple departments, were merged under a single Wales-led executive team. The goal was clarity, control, and cohesion. But beneath that structure lay something deeper: authority. William was no longer preparing to lead. He was already doing it. And the institution, whether it admitted it or not, had already begun adjusting to his rule. Meanwhile, Camilla stepped back, quietly, formally. 2 major royal engagements, once cornerstones of her calendar, were handed off without fanfare. No explanation was offered. None was needed. Her silence, once used as a shield, now marked the end of resistance. Those closest to her knew the truth. This was not retirement. It was retreat. A recognition that the battle for standing had been lost not in one moment, but over many. Her influence wasn't stripped in scandal, but redistributed through strategy. She had been outmaneuvered, not overthrown. And through it all, Charles remained still. No public statements, no appearances clarifying his stance. His silence only fueled speculation that talks of abdication were no longer hypothetical. Some insiders claimed he had been worn down. Others said he was simply allowing the transition he always knew was inevitable. Either way, his absence now defined the palace more than his presence. And the monarchy, long guided by his cautious hand, now moved to the rhythm of a different heartbeat. The public, as always, was divided. Some praised the modernization, the efficiency, the bold leadership emerging from the Wales corner. Others mourned the quiet burial of traditions that had stood for generations. But regardless of sentiment, one truth remained clear. The monarchy had entered a new age, not through crisis, not through death, but through evolution. And in that evolution, Catherine had emerged not as the wife of a future king, but as a force the crown now relied on to survive. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.